Okay, so this is a book that has multiple editions. As far as I think that the 2016 edition is the most recent, updated. So, introduction to the new edition. Just a few points about the film. Right, this is the longest running film in history, with a 1,009-week run. And that's something really, really worth thinking about, right? Oh, disorganized today. I'm not all here, by the way. Just to kind of be honest. It's very dreary. A lot of things are going on in the world. A lot of crazy things are going on in the world. But yeah, just imagine the fact that like a film to work for 1,009 weeks, right? To be running for basically decades, right? So the producers finally decided to take the film down. This is on X on page 10 in February of 2015. But those plans had to ultimately be canceled because of the outcry, right? I think it's safe to assume. Again, I didn't look this up. I should. That the film is still playing, and again, that's, I think, something worth thinking about, right? Because I keep talking about. So to kind of build on the idea of difference, I keep talking about films telling us something about ourselves. DDLJ is playing in India, since its release, and it's never stopped. Conversely, that's not the case in the U.S. It played, in places it probably still plays. There's still screenings, right? But it's not like it had a massive release like something like Star Wars or Avengers, and is still playing. So the fact that film is still playing and has such a high demand in India tells us something about its viewers, right? Similarly, the fact that we aren't crazy about DDLJ in the U.S., but we are crazy about something a lot of people are crazy about, and that's part of the move, right? So a lot of people are crazy about the Avengers. Don't for a moment think that everyone of Indian heritage, descent, or citizenship is crazy about DDLJ. That's just crazy. Like, you can't make statements like that, right? But those films will respectively, or the inverse, the fact that a film does poorly in another place, respectively tells us things about each of those demographics or audiences. But the way we use that is the more important part. That just means like this audience does this audience does that. And that's just a difference as such. That does not mean this audience is that much more better or sophisticated or cultured, or this one is less. That's exactly what I mean in terms of like, it's not about difference. It's the problem is how we approach, difference or particularity. This is a very canonical film when talking about international cinema. I had to watch, most of the films that we're watching, I had to watch, over the course of my education training as a film scholar, as a media person. And so in that sense, would be a canonical film. That's another question. Why isn't it on Criterion Collection? My guess is probably not because, maybe there's some of that it's like for Criterion, like it doesn't meet the criteria of being, of being worthy. But I'm going to guess it's probably less that, and probably has much more to do with like rights, right? That this is still a massively lucrative film, and whomever owns the rights would probably be much more hesitant to kind of give that over to Criterion. But again, because that does happen in the U.S. as well. But so Chopra talks about an old template of Hindi cinema, of Hindi language cinema. Again, there are several languages spoken in India. It's not a monolithic state. Same with cinema. A lot of different cinemas or films, and cinema, I guess, like smaller kind of sectors are filmed in different languages. It's similar like when you talk about Chinese cinema is not the same as Hong Kong cinema, and then there's the big distinction, is it in Cantonese, is it in Mandarin? And the Mandarin is spoken far more. Hong Kong cinema was primarily Cantonese, that sort of thing. And that's the thing, is that like, I don't think it's like universal for people to be fluent in both Mandarin and Cantonese. Similarly, like we can't assume that all Indians, people in India would be able to understand, you know, natively all of the films and all of the different dialects. This is again an important kind of point to make, because we can't sort of treat India as singular and the US as singular and the two are opposed. There is difference within India too. Just the way, again, like the point I made out, just like there's difference in the US internally, right? It's not necessarily automatically going to be kind of consistent or stable. But the old template of Hindi cinema, which this film kind of really breaks apart, is of the 3-hour melodrama. To be frank, that's one of the, for me, like the big thing about Indian cinema is like, I can't do 3 hours. I can barely do 2, like I want tight 90 minutes. Melodrama with comedy, action, song, and dance. I think what's particularly interesting is on 11, on X1, or XI, Chopra talks about how it's a predominantly male audience to DDLJ, which is, you know, Chopra doesn't really give insight as to why, but that's something that I would ask you, having watched the film. Why, like, how would this? Part of what we can say is that, like, obviously there's a different sort of standard or idea of masculinity in this context. In what way do you think this would appeal to men, right? And on such a massive level that men would keep going to see this film for over 20 years. So let's get to the part about affective attachment. This is on 12, on XII. And this, I think, is one of the most important sort of passages. It's basically the full half page. Well, let's start from the previous page. I had analyzed the film enough times to know exactly how writer and director Aditya Chopra was pushing our emotional buttons and playing us, as Alfred Hitchcock put it, like an organ. So think about the metaphors and analogies making here, and also the move that Chopra is relating Chopra to Alfred Hitchcock. So that's not a neutral move either. But there's a way in which both Chopra and Hitchcock, what they do is they play. They play whom? Audiences. Like what? Like an organ, right? Like an instrument. So the idea is that they are musicians who have subjectivity that manipulate the audiences as if we are what? Inanimate objects. So if you think about this, right? Chopra has studied the film enough to know exactly the ways in which the director Chopra pushes our emotional buttons, our affect. So it's almost like we are a soundboard or one of those, like, you know, internet soundboards. Like, you push this button, I start crying. You push this button, I start laughing. You push this button, which goes back to the body genres. I get excited. I get mad. That's basically what both Chopra and Hitchcock are doing, right? Is they're pushing our buttons. And what does this ultimately come down to? They're manipulating us. It's manipulation, right? Now the key distinction here, right? The key distinction here is that we are not inanimate objects, and it's not a like unilateral relationships, a bilateral relationship, right? This is why it's hegemony, because we agree. This is manipulation by consent, right? That's the relationship that we have with our culture. I go in, I expect to be manipulated, I expect to be sad or happy or angry or irritated, right? And I'm allowing someone else to do that to me, right? But that's the thing, is that the reason I'm bringing that up, I'm not saying that that's a problem in and of itself. It's not a problem that we're okay with being manipulated, or that we are being manipulated. It's that this idea and this relationship of a kind of consensual manipulation does not necessarily jive with the primary ideological tenets of how we think of our own selves. where we think of ourselves like in terms of individuality or free will or agency, right? We don't, we like, I was watching, it was like John Oliver, and it was an episode about Confederacy, right? And how, it's a hot button topic, but you hear a lot of people talk about, like, well, that's my heritage. I want to know that I want people to know that Americans have a little rebel in us. This is not rebellious in the slightest. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? There's a kind of like hitch there. And so it's just something that we kind of have to think about. It's like, me personally, I'm saying there's nothing wrong with this. It's just that we say one thing. It doesn't line up with what we say about ourselves, as if we are constantly and always in control. No, we like asking other people, to take control. But it's like we're ashamed of it, or we're actually, kind of oblivious to it. And I don't think we're oblivious. But keep going. This is the important point. It's the but. The but is incredibly important here, because there's a turn. A turn happens in those two passages. I got really irritated because someone on Game of Thrones, a character on Game of Thrones had said this, and suddenly everyone started saying it, where it was like a line where it's like anything that comes before or after but doesn't matter. And I had been saying that for years, so I kind of got irritated because Game of Thrones had credit for it. And I'm sure some, famous philosophers said it like long before I did, but anyways, at least popular, like amongst my circles, right? So, it's like one of the most like sort of common iterations of this is like, I don't want to sound racist, I don't want to sound sexist, I don't want to sound homophobic, but. So it's like, in spite of that, I'm still going to say what I have to say, right? So, that's what I mean, is that like, this is just usually a cushion to do this anyway, right? Another but the primary kind of formulation of this, and it does go to Marxist theory, is precisely the way in which we often turn away from like critical thinking. So even this formulation is like, I know this sounds racist, I should probably not talk about it and probably not say it, but instead think about why I feel this way. But no, it's to indulge it and to move forward anyway. So similarly, the classical formulation of this, and I guess that's where this comes from, it's not me, but I know very well, but. And it's I know very well, but I behave as if I don't know. And so similarly for Chopra, what Chopra is saying is that I know I'm being manipulated, but the key line, none of it mattered, right? That is not necessarily a sort of critical engagement in that I've processed all of this, I've thought about all of it, these are the conclusions that I've reached, so much as I know that this is happening, doesn't matter, it's okay, right? And that's a sort of formulation that I think we need to really think about in our own lives, right? The fantasy Aditya created is so persuasive that it forces you to surrender, right? Power. That is what this is about, right? Is that as I just surrender my agency, Chopra, take me away. After all these years, watching DDLJ feels like eating make hatka kana. The film now functions as cinematic comfort food. Comforting from what? Comfort for what are we avoiding? In a world grown increasingly ugly, DDLJ provides solace and a smile. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with seeking comfort. I don't think there's anything in seeking solace. I've been insisting that you all practice self-care. I've been trying to practice an immense amount of self-care this last week or so. But the problem, right, is it's this turn away where it's like, I know that there's something going on here, that I should be more critical, that there's something of a philosophical, ethical problem, that's something that I'm not facing, something that I'm not confronting, that there's something wrong with my own practice, but it's that turn away. I'm just going to indulge what I feel, and I feel happy right now. Who cares if there's something problematic sort of underlining that happiness? I'm just gonna run with it. And so this is a sort of kind of really illustrative moment of the danger, right, And again, I'm going to say it's a false binary. I don't think that affect and emotion are separate from critical thinking and rationale. I just don't think that's true. But you can see, here's the but, you can see in an instance like this where they are put in opposition to one another, and how one turns away from that and just goes towards this. This is precisely why, from day one, I've been trying to insist that you don't simply just indulge how you feel. Oh, I feel this movie is stupid. I feel I really like this movie. And rather try and stop for a moment and take a moment to say, well, instead of how I feel about it, what do I think about it? Or, even better, what do I think about what I feel? You know, I really don't like this movie. Wait a minute. Why don't I like this movie? What does that mean? What does that say about myself? That's the kind of move that we're constantly sort of moving towards. Okay, so moving on.